I think the Chinese companies in Nigeria are key to rebuilding Nigerian industrial prospects. They are working very hard with Nigerian counterparts. Of course, there may be one or two issues. Like Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese reform leader, said, if you open your window to get some fresh air, some insect might flew in. But a wise man is not going to shut the window of the fresh air simply because some insect flew in. China-Nigerian cooperation is a working project. There could be one or two issues, but the only way to resolve issues within the context of Nigeria and China cooperation is more cooperation, not less. So I see a very bright prospects. We're on a trajectory of development. We're on a trajectory of evolving this cooperation into very robust mechanism to re-engage Africa to the prime of global value chain, bringing Africa back to the global industrial value chain, bringing Africa right into the mainstream of global economy, bringing Africa to participate in the fourth industrial revolution, and positioning Africa as the next workshop of the world.
We are going to be having this exclusive interview with Mr. Charles Onunaju,
That's right.
who is the director of Nigeria Center for China Studies. Thank you very much for joining us, sir.
Yeah.
As a way of introduction, may we meet you briefly?
Yeah, like you rightly described, I'm Mr. Charles Onunaju, Director Center for China Studies, based in Abuja.
Good. Now, before we delve into Nigeria-China relations, can you briefly describe to us the nature of Nigeria's foreign policy since independence, perhaps?
Well, Nigerian foreign policy has evolved, but like every other foreign policy, it was designed to secure our national interest, and project it to the international system. That has been the nature, the traditional nature of foreign policy, and it evolves with time. Nigerian policy was first and foremost to secure our sovereignty, territorial integrity, and then within that context to engage with the international community to build up relevant national aggregates to boost our national destiny, and then of course Nigerian commitment to Africa, anti-colonialism, the fight against apartheid. Well, let's move very quickly to what we have today. Nigerian foreign policy is focused on engaging the international community with a view to solve some very existential challenges. Top of most now is security and, of course, economic well-being of the Nigerian people. Whether we have built sufficient institutional platform to advance this is another question. Whether we have upgraded our institutional platform for engaging the international system, whether we have even reassessed the international system a lot more realistically and flow with the current change is another thing. There has been significant development in the international system. The pivot from the Atlantic to the Pacific, the rise of China, the centrality of Asia-Pacific region. Have our foreign policy been able to capture this trend and engage it realistically? This is a completely new question. China presents a unique opportunity, not just to Africa, but to the world. China is both an opportunity to the world, and the world is also an opportunity to China. How are we engaging this opportunity? Are we making the best of it? Are we engaging policy focused? Are we sitting out and letting things pass us by, or letting things happen to us on its own? Or are we meeting the challenge? There are a whole lot of questions.
Now, let us mirror it down to specifics. Since you mentioned China earlier,
Yeah.
Nigeria and China have been having bilateral ties since 1971.
Yeah.
Now, can you run us through this friendship between both nations? How has it been since then?
China and Nigerian cooperation is one of the most enduring, one of the most significant. Like, in January 1971, Nigeria and China established diplomatic relations. And soon after that, the challenge of China formal readmission to the United Nations was on the table. Nigeria was among 23 African countries and 76 other countries in the world that voted overwhelmingly to have China return to the United Nations. You know, Resolution 1759, that iconic resolution in which the collaborators of Sheikh and Shak was expelled and People's Republic of China was readmitted. By the way, China was a founding member of the United Nations. Even China was the first signatory of the United Nations Charter in 1945. And even after New China was founded, the Sheikh and Sheikh regime illegally occupied the seat meant for China and was supported and manipulated by the West, whom the New China was established against their will. So Nigeria keyed in, our cooperation with China was on the upswing immediately. By 1973, Nigerian leader General Yakubu Gowon was in Beijing, met the legendary Chairman Mao Zedong, and cooperation had been stable. Nigeria also embraced the one China policy, which was focused essentially. There is only one China in the world, and Taiwan is inalienable part of China. That has been the hallmark of Nigerian foreign policy toward China. From the 70s, the 80s, 90s, the relationship took a different turn. From being in the cooler, it came to the center. Nigeria and China cooperation became enigmatic. In 2005, at the turn of the century, the FOCA, Forum on China-African Cooperation, was founded as an institutional platform to drive China-African cooperation. And Nigeria has always been considered a clear passenger. In 2005, China established what they call strategic partnership with 3 countries, Egypt, South Africa, and Nigeria. You know, bringing Nigeria to the core of China foreign election. And like you know, China took relation with Africa as a foundation of this foreign policy. And for over 30 years, it has become a tradition of Chinese foreign ministers to start his work on the international scene with a visit to Africa. President Xi's election to the presidency was obviously a game changer. In 2013, soon after he was elected to the presidency by the NPC, his first trip was to Russia and straight from Russia to Africa, coming to Tanzania and delivering his pivotal framework on China-African cooperation, enumerating that China, no matter how China grows, no matter how big China becomes, no matter how powerful China becomes, China will consider her relationship with Africa as concrete. So these are the trajectory of China-African cooperation. Like you know, in recent times, it's become enigmatic. The Belt and Road process, most African countries, in fact, Africa has the largest number of countries within any region to be members of to sign the Memorandum of Understanding of the Belt and Road process. You know, with that framework, Nigeria is in the forefront of early harvest of the Belt and Road process. In the next few days, the Lekki Deep Sea Port, Nigerian first ever deep sea port, will be launched.
Yes.
Nigerian first ever deep sea port will be launched. It is believed that seaport will generate up to 200,000 jobs, direct jobs. It will provide revenues worth almost 400 billion to various tiers of Nigerian government, and we cut the cost of doing business in Nigeria, especially the maritime component, by almost half. So these are the early clear harvest of China-Nigerian cooperation within the framework of the Belt and Road Initiative. A number of power plants has gone on stream. Railway line, roads network have all come on stream. As you know, almost more than 200 Chinese companies are participating in Nigerian reindustrialization. The Ogun's Guangdong, Export Promotion Center, the Lekki Free Trade, the Calabar Free Trade Zone. These are all harvests of our cooperation with China. And these are all a work in the process.
That's impressive, sir. You know, I acknowledge the fact that you have a grasp of this relationship. Now, you mentioned earlier some of the laudable interventions, of the Chinese government, towards Nigeria. Now, the Chinese government recently provided capital for the revitalization, as we all know, of rail lines, airport, road projects, and the likes. Now, how significant are these projects, this intervention to the Nigerian economy?
Yeah, but that's just some of the issues we're talking.
Yes.
These are very significant. I've just told you,
Mm.
these are generating local jobs. For several years in the 70s, in the 80s, was some of the issues within the academia and the general public is transfer of technology. How do here we have Nigeria and China working together. Companies, you can find Nigeria in the middle cadre and top cadre of various Chinese companies. There is engagement, and what we see is massive employment. If you read the report of the McKinsey and Company, a global management consortium published a report in 2017, June. It called it the dance of the dragon and the lion, how China and Africa is engaging. It outlined in area of aid, in area of investment, in area of trade, China is head and shoulder above every other country in the world when it comes to these specific areas in relation to Nigeria, in relation to Africa. It talks about massive job creation. Not less than, as at that time, over 20,000 jobs have been created across Africa with the domestication of Chinese companies in Africa, and more are to come. These things are economic trend. China is becoming a middle income country. Most of the companies will have to relocate for where labor cost is reasonably cheap. And Africa is a choice. This was the advantage China enjoyed 40 years ago when it became the workshop of the world because of relative labor cost. Companies from Europe, America, and Japan were relocating to China. Today, Africa holds the same advantage of relative labor low cost, and Chinese companies are flocking here. What we need is institutional rules. We need to standardize the rules, provide security, and we can be sure that Africa, and Nigeria particularly speaking, is poised to be the next industrial frontier, or if you like, the next workshop of the world. And this is no less thanks to the Chinese companies that are moving here. Like I told you, it's not out of charity. It is simply that Africa presents a new opportunity for these companies. So we are going to see what we call made in Africa with China in a very short time coming. The question is, how are our leadership positioning themselves through relevant policy framework to engage these opportunities? It's still an open question to be answered. How are we engaging? Just like the McKinsey report puts, how are various African countries engaging the opportunity of China? Some are engaging it policy-wise, some are waiting for it to fall on their feet, some are more proactive, some are more active. So how are we going to respond to the opportunity of China, especially to Africa, as it relates economic renaissance in Africa? This is a question for the leadership, policymakers, and also even for research centers like ours.
So in a nutshell, this intervention by the Chinese government and the project executed by Nigeria through these funds have impacted significantly to the economy.
Absolutely. Like I've just told you, the Lekki Deep Sea Port was almost $2 billion project invested by Chinese and contracted to them. So what we are going to see is a massive injection, revival of Nigerian maritime industry, putting Nigeria as a hub of the maritime industry in West Africa. For the first time, we're going to have a deep sea port. Big ships, we they call it. That's why people go to Cotonou to clear, because they have deep sea port. And it is cheaper to clear in Cotonou. That's why you see people going to Cotonou to pay less and smuggle their product. Now with Lekki Deep Sea Port, there will be no need for that, because we can have big ship making calls to our port. This is the first ever Nigerian deep sea port. What we have is seaport, but not deep sea port. But now we are going to have it. And this is thanks to our engagement with China within the framework of the Belt and Road Initiative. The Belt and Road consists of infrastructure construction, both maritime, overland, sky, and fiber. So this is a major component, is a very clear harvest of our engagement with China under the framework of the Belt and Road Initiative.
That's impressive. Now, before we delve onto the CPC, the Communist Party, and others, it has been argued in some quarters that the presence of Chinese business interests in Nigeria is another form of neo-colonialism. That it is not really a win-win situation. Do you share in this assertion?
Well, this is this kind of views do not originate from Africa. It do not originate from China. It do not originate from Nigeria. It is people who would want us to remain poor, who would want us to remain aid recipients, who would want us to remain where we are, that are manipulating these views. The record is very clear. We have our rail back on track. I am sure there are a lot of young people who never saw a train. Today, the trains are back.
I'm a living testimony.
Yes, like I told you, today we have. Recently, if you remember, a month ago, the United States published what they call their strategy for Africa, and the opening line of that strategy is that U.S. is going to work with Africa to contain what they call harmful effects of China and Russia in Africa. And the question we ask, what is the harmful effects? Roads that were built, ports that were constructed, power plants that were built, schools that were built, hospitals that were built. If these are all harmful effects, Africa needs just more of it.
Okay.
So I can assure you that neocolonialism is a very harsh word. China itself was a victim, not just of colonialism, of vicious colonialism of several countries. At the turn of 20th century, Beijing itself was occupied by 7 allied powers. And the 19th century is what the Chinese call century of humiliation, in which China was partitioned into spheres of influence. If you remember, the sister of Hong Kong, the sister of Macau, and so many others, forcing the weak Qing dynasty to sign concession, including concession to sell narcotics to China, the Opium War. These are all what China experienced. So China is experienced colonialism, experienced racism. Even in Shanghai, where you have many, many concessions in the early 20s, there are signs that Chinese and dogs are not allowed here. These are the extent to which the Chinese will have. So Chinese understood very, very well what the pains, the excruciating pain, the torture that comes with colonialism and its hybrid neocolonialism. And the Chinese are not in any position to do that. The nature of the Communist Party as a party and the nature of New China has nothing underlining its structure, its outlook, its mechanism that comes anything close to colonialism or neocolonialism. So these are basically ideological slander that had no validity with the facts on the ground, especially in Africa and in Nigeria. I think the Chinese companies in Nigeria are key to rebuilding Nigerian industrial prospects. They are working very hard with Nigerian counterparts. Of course, there may be 1 or 2 issues. Like Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese reform leader, said, if you open your window to get some fresh air, some insect might fly in. But a wise man is not going to shut the window of the fresh air simply because some insect flew in. China-Nigerian cooperation is a working project. There could be 1 or 2 issues, but the only way to resolve issues within the context of Nigeria-China cooperation is more cooperation, not less. So I see a very bright prospect. We're on a trajectory of development. We're on a trajectory of evolving this cooperation into very robust mechanism to re-engage Africa to the prime of global value chain, bringing Africa back to the global industrial value chain, bringing Africa right into the mainstream of global economy, bringing Africa to participate in the 4th industrial revolution, and positioning Africa as the next workshop of the world. That's the prospect.
That's impressive. Now let's mirror it down to the political activities happening in China. The Communist Party recently held its 20th National Congress, where President Xi was elected for another 5 years in office. Now, how do you think the election of President Xi will impact the future of China and, of course, trade with Africa and Nigeria?
Yes, let me say very frankly, since the 18th National Congress, when President Xi was elected General Secretary of the party, the profile of China-Africa has significantly increased. In 2015, we have the epoch-making second China-African Summit that held in Johannesburg, South Africa. It was an opening. President Xi outlined the 10 cooperation plans, including industrialization, infrastructure construction, whole range of activity, the 10 plans. In 2018, at the Beijing Third African China Summit, President Xi outlined another 8 initiatives, 10 initiatives, which reinforced all this, you understand. And this was very enabling. They were epoch-making. They were trailblazers in terms of engaging Africa in the challenges that we understand to be existential to Africa. Infrastructure construction went up massively, and the outcomes are very delightful to see. The first electrified railway connecting Ethiopian industrial heartland to Djibouti. Ethiopia is a landlocked country with no access to the sea. But with the construction of that electrified highway, travel time was cut from 5 days to 8 hours. The Mombasa-Nairobi railway line, standard gauge. I was in Mombasa. I saw the port of Mombasa being revived and then being linked to Kenya by railway. I was in the industrial heartland in Hausa, in Ethiopia. These are all major breakthroughs that we saw. The port of Benguela in Angola, the port in Tanzania, Zambia, everywhere, Africa was back to reckoning, both as an economic power, as a significant, China gave tremendous boost to African profile as a key global player. And today, there's no Minister of Foreign Affairs in the world that does not have Department of African Affairs. Prior to final China engagement, African Affairs was subletted to film actors and musicians. We see them come to Africa and visit refugee camps and demonstrate their humanity. That site is normal. What we see today is construction site with China and African technicians comparing notes. This is not palatable. It's not something some people in the West, their primetime television or refugee camps where children are squatting, then with a sprinkle of Western show business, giving aid, feeding them with bread. It's no longer what you see on the prime time is sky rising in Africa. Chinese and African engineers comparing notes on project sites. This is not very pleasant to supporters in Europe and America, where Africa is supposed to be poor, an object of pity, an object of humanitarian concern. China elevated the profile of Africa. Like I told you, no foreign ministry anywhere in the world can afford to ignore Africa. And this is basically on account of the enigmatic epochal cooperation between China and Africa. From the founding of FOCAC up to today, it had never missed a single edition, no matter what the world has become. And each delivers a practical roadmap to enriching the China-African cooperation. FOCAC has no big secretariat and big officials like Secretary General, but it's a process, it's a mechanism that continuously evolves and works. It is not, it has within it follow-up mechanism that there is no dull moment in China-African cooperation. I've had the privilege to offer advisories to some countries that wanted China-African cooperation. How did the Chinese get it right? That within the framework of FOCAC, it is dialogue process, practical with tangible outcomes at every edition. And since the coming of President Xi Jinping, it has taken a significantly important dimension. The last year in Senegal, President Xi outlined another 9 programs to drive China-African cooperation in the 9 years. One of the most interesting I found, China is going to establish a green lane to allow for 300 billion worth of agricultural product from Africa to be sent to China. We're talking about diversification.
Yes.
What can be more important that Africa has a guaranteed market of 300 billion worth of agricultural products in the next 3 years? Think of AGOA, American African Growth Opportunity. From the early stage when it netted 108 billion, today is less than 64 billion. Most African countries have been removed from the AGOA process for politically motivated purposes. The latest is Ethiopia, Mali, and Guinea, with a claim that they are regressing on human rights. How do you, people who are regressing on human rights, you remove them from engaging in economic activity that will improve the life of people, improve their awareness, and help them challenge the regression in their human rights. You are removing them, you're putting them down. That is what our Western friends do, because China believes you need to create a condition for people to be aware of their rights and enjoy it. So I think it is very apt to say that China-African cooperation is a historic opportunity to Africa. My hope and my concern is that Africa takes it very seriously. I've maintained one thing. In all history of African international partnership, there is no time we have found a partner who is able and willing. Able and willing. In the past, we have had partners that are willing but not able. Others are able but not willing. In China, we had a partner that is both willing and able to support Africa in engaging the challenges it confronts today. So for me, China is African historic opportunity. I hope African leadership and policy makers will leverage the opportunity of China and engage some of our serious existential issues.